Welcome back to the channel and to our Unicorn Chevy S-10 project. As many of you folks noticed, this truck has been camera shy for the last month or so, and there's a good reason for that. You see, I went ahead and put a 5.7 liter Chevy V8 in it. Yep, I had to, and it'll all make sense in a moment. But first, let's take a look at that engine. So this is a 2-bolt main cast iron Chevy 350 engine block, plus I also have the crankshaft and I even have a box full of pistons and rods. All in all, I reckon this junk weighs about 300 pounds, which is the subject for today's video. Today, we're going to do some performance testing on our Volkswagen diesel-powered pickup truck, and we're going to be adding a significant amount of weight to the truck, just to see how the 54 horsepower naturally aspirated diesel engine responds. Oh, I'm sorry if I confused you. I thought everybody knew what 350's best feature was. It makes great ballast. Meh, these things also make great boat anchors. I joke. Settle down. It was just a joke. Lighten up, Francis. Anyway, this is the 350 that was pulled from the IROC Camaro, and this engine has been labeled FUBAR, so now it's been repurposed as ballast. The Chevy S-10 with a 350 ain't gonna be enough weight to make a difference, so let's add a trailer. Yep, that's a very nice heavy trailer. But as you can see, it's completely empty. It would sure be nice if we could put something heavy on this trailer. Let's drop the tailgate. Ooh, this tailgate is topped off with a steel mesh, and that also makes the tailgate a very nice ramp. And just like that, we have a heavy piece of lawn equipment taking up most of the unused space. Nice, very nice. Well, let me take that back. This is pretty stupid. There's no way a 54 horsepower diesel engine can deal with this kind of a load. So let's try it anyway. This should be interesting. Alright, so our little short box pickup truck is all grown up, and now it's just over 30 feet long. That works out to 9.144 meters for the metric crowd. Of course, I have absolutely no idea how much all this stuff weighs. You know, there's a lot of metal here. Well, I think the first thing we need to do is head over to the grain elevator where they have a scale large enough and we can get an idea how much this rig weighs. My best guess is we're close to 4,000 pounds when you add up all the junk we're hauling today. So far, the truck's doing okay. It's a bit sluggish though. So the last time we weighed just the truck, it came in at 2,520 pounds. Now, when you add the 350 Chevy engine, plus the 2-wheeled trailer and the Craftsman LT2000 riding mower, well, we're tipping the scales at 4,140 pounds. It'll be interesting to see how the 54 horsepower diesel engine copes with all this additional weight. Around the neighborhood, the truck doesn't seem to mind pulling the trailer. I reckon the only effect the additional weight has is the slightly sluggish acceleration. Normally, I wouldn't be too concerned. However, this tailgate is made out of a steel mesh and it's hard to see on camera, but it does add a significant amount of aerodynamic drag. The extra drag will show up on the exhaust gas temperature gauge. The EGT gauge is a very good indicator of how much of a load the diesel engine's under. Right now, the gauge seems about normal, so that's good. Okay, let's head out of town so we can see how the trailer affects the truck at greater speeds. Well, the faster I go, the more I can feel the effect of the trailer. The tailgate is definitely a huge drag. Unfortunately, the tailgate is a feature and it can't be removed. For a truck like this, a tilt trailer without a tailgate would be a better option. So, as I'm picking up speed in 4th gear, the exhaust gas temperatures are rising quickly and now we're over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. I think this is not a good situation for the engine, and it's probably not a good idea to do a fuel economy test today. I really wanted to do one, but it's a bit risky with the higher than expected exhaust gas temperatures. In the past, we discovered this rig would get almost 42 miles per gallon if it's driven normally in 4th gear. The funny thing is, the fuel economy will actually go down if we use use 5th gear or overdrive. The truck has a 3.73 rear axle, and it really needs the 410 axle that was available on some of the S10 pickups. I'm still keeping an eye out on Marketplace for a complete axle that we can swap in, but nothing has really shown up yet. Well, let me explain that. Sure, there are parts including larger displacement Volkswagen turbo diesel engines and rear axles all over Marketplace, but stuff tends to be very far away. You know, I hate to be critical about the folks who sell stuff on the Book of Faces, but in my experience, most of the stuff is junk, and some folks are just trying to make a buck or two on naive customers. I don't want to drive 3 hours just to find out an item I wanted to buy is NFG. I can do that locally just as easy. For example, a few weeks ago, I looked at a Honda Gullwing. Basically, I just wanted the bike for its engine. Anyway, it would seem that the seller forgot to mention that the bike was underwater at some point, and the engine was completely locked up solid. Deals like that are a lot more common than you think. Alright, let's do some performance testing. First, without a trailer, and we'll see how the estimated 300-pound payload affects the truck. Will this 5.7-liter Chevy V8 make the truck faster, or is it just dead weight? You be the judge. Time to beat is 23 seconds for the 0 to 55 and 28 seconds for the 0 to 60. Wow, that was a pretty big difference. The small block Chevy engine slowed us down by a good 5 seconds in the 0 to 55 and a cool 6.5 seconds in the 0 to 60. I wonder if an engine has to be running to make a difference. Interesting. Now, despite the slower acceleration times, the truck felt fine, and the extra weight over the rear axle does improve the ride quality quite a bit. So I guess putting a small block Chevy in an S10 is not a bad thing. It's just not going to make the truck faster. You know, I have proof right here for the skeptics. Okay, now with the trailer. The time to beat is 23 seconds for the 0 to 55, and you can forget about the 0 to 60 because this dog ain't gonna hunt. .17 seconds to accelerate this 30-foot, 4,140-pound rig up to 55 miles per hour. You know, it could be worse. We did it in less than a minute, so that's something to be proud of, I guess. The exhaust gas temperature is maxed out at just over 1200 degrees Fahrenheit, and I have to tell you, I was getting a little bit scared. But the little engine did it. It wasn't happy, but it did it. It seems like once I hit 45 miles per hour and then shifted into 4th gear, that was it. The engine just couldn't pull hard enough to briskly accelerate this contraption. From 45 to 55 miles per hour, it took an additional 21 seconds. Normally, it takes about 5 seconds. All the extra crap ends up weighing 1,600 pounds, and that obviously made a difference with performance. But I would say the biggest difference was likely due to the drag from the tailgate. Basically, the drag from this metal mesh tailgate becomes an issue above 45 miles per hour, which makes sense. Typically, 45 miles per hour is where the aerodynamic drag starts becoming a problem with any vehicle. Now, clearly, this truck really shouldn't be pulling a trailer like this at highway speeds, but the little 54 horsepower diesel engine really doesn't have a problem below 45 miles per hour. The roads that we do our testing on are not heavily traveled, and we could get away with driving around slower, but on the main roads, it's dangerous to travel slower than the posted speed limits. Plus, it's annoying to other drivers. Now, with the estimated weight of 300 pounds in the bed of the truck and without the trailer, we do have a difference in acceleration times. For this truck, 300 pounds does seem to make a difference, but I reckon it could handle 500 or more pounds and still go at highway speeds. Of course, here in Kansas, where the entire state is pretty much as flat as a pancake, I'm comfortable making a statement like that. This truck would not do well in the hills of North Carolina, that's for sure. You know, I've driven on NC-80 hundreds of times, and this silly truck would not pass that test. Now, at this point in the build, we need to either turbocharge the 1.6 liter engine or go with a bigger engine with a turbo. Of course, there are a few minor issues I need to address in the meantime. For instance, there's no cooling fan on the engine, and I've been using the heater to keep the engine temperature under control. It works fine in the winter, but today it was close to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and although the heater was able to keep the engine at a safe temperature, I did notice the truck was running hotter than normal. I suspect the trailer had a lot to do with that. I think it would also be wise to install an oil cooler. You know, I've checked, and in the past, the oil tends to run about 10 to 15 degrees hotter than the engine, and that's on the cold days. So I got some work to do, regardless of what engine goes into this buggy. I really like this truck, but damn, it needs more power. On the other hand, this truck is perfectly fine for local driving. I've been driving this thing off camera more than I normally should, and the main reason is it's a fun truck and I love the sound of the angry diesel engine. Now, diesel engine sounds coming from a Chevy S-10 pickup is a rare treat. Back in the early 80s, these trucks were available with a 62 horsepower Isuzu diesel engine, but not many of those trucks are still around. When I drive this thing around town, nobody notices, because after all, diesel trucks are pretty common in a rural farming community. Although, just the other day, one of the local pedestrians did a double take when I drove by. I reckon that's a fella who knows a thing or two and realizes this shabby looking truck shouldn't be making angry diesel noises. For someone who knows cars and trucks, seeing a unicorn like this diesel S-10 in the wild is probably a unique experience. It's nothing special on the outside, but under the hood, the unmistakable ruckus from the diesel engine sets this thing apart from other crummy S-10s. Well, I had planned to do a fuel economy test today because that's an excellent indicator on how hard the engine's working. I think it's fairly obvious that the little diesel engine was not happy pulling the trailer, and I based that on the higher than expected exhaust gas temperatures. Unfortunately, due to the higher temps, I decided against pushing the truck to the extreme, or 60 or so miles. Now, we could have done a fuel economy test at lower speeds, but that's not realistic. If I want to show fuel economy when the truck is doing real work, I really do need to drive at highway speeds. And typically we report fuel economy numbers with an average speed of 55 miles per hour. Now, I can speculate on the probable fuel economy if the truck was driven between 40 and 45 miles per hour. At that speed, we would likely see around 30 miles to the US gallon. Now, I have a decent amount of seat time in this rig, and I religiously watch the exhaust gas temperature gauge. And based on my observation, that number makes sense. Basically, on this naturally aspirated engine, the hotter the exhaust gas temperatures, the more fuel the engine is consuming. It's pretty much that simple. So, I want to give a shout out to Christopher over in Germany. Chris is an awesome guy, and he sent me 2 smart glow plug relays that he had left over from his Series 2 Land Rover with a Mercedes OM617 diesel engine conversion. Chris indicated that these relays were also used on the Peugeot 205. Meh, we haven't had a Peugeot here in the States since the late 80s. French cars are a little bit too weird for Americans, although Peugeot is probably the least weirdest car. You know, my dad toyed around with a 67 404 sedan back in the 80s, and it was a solid, well-built car as I recall. The column-shifted 4-speed was unique, but not crazy. Anyway, these glow plug relays have a couple of cool features, including afterglow. Basically, this gizmo will eliminate the need to push the glow plug button on the dashboard. Now, what's really cool is, Chris also included a very nice hand-drawn schematic. Now, I can really appreciate that. So, I assume that most folks know what a glow plug relay is, but I reckon there are folks who don't. Anyway, these doohickeys are not going to make the truck faster, and boy do we need that. Instead, it's just going to automate the startup process. It's kind of a luxury item in a way. So, thank you very much, Christopher. I'm really looking forward to installing and testing these gizmos in the near future. Well, that's all the time I have for today, and we'll continue with the shenanigans next time. Until then,